in 2013, in April 2013, I read an article about what was called a bank bail-in in Cyprus, in the European Union. Cyprus had some difficulty with their making some financial obligations, and in response to that, they actually went into everybody's bank account in the country and took a small percentage out, it was like 6 or 7%, in order to pay back their financial obligations. So I read that article about this, and there was a throwaway line that everybody was upset about it in Cyprus, but Bitcoin users were unaffected. And I was like, who's unaffected by this? So then I looked into it, and it was like this aha moment, like, oh, wow. So the reason why Bitcoin users were unaffected was because no government, no one can take your Bitcoin, right? Like if you hold Bitcoin yourself, no one can take it. You have complete control over it. And if you hold dollars, euros, whatever it is in a bank, a lot of us presume that it's safe there, and in 99% of the time it is, but it's not 100%, right? With Bitcoin, it's 100%. So that kind of started me on a path to really look into Bitcoin as something with really entrenched censorship resistance properties, which was very attractive to me. Again, like money is speech. So if you could censor how people spend their money, or if you could, control how people spend their money, then you can control what they think. So that was kind of my entry into Bitcoin 12 years ago.
So how does the process of Bitcoin work? Because I think that's like when people can't get their head around it, then they tend to not want to participate. But yeah. I think if people were to understand it, and based on what you just said, I'm concerned about that, because I could totally see the government. I'm not like a anti-government person, but I do recognize like the gaps within the government and things that could be done better. But I do believe strongly that when people understand Bitcoin, because more and more people, especially when you look at Gen Zs, are definitely proponents of Bitcoin. But I think Gen X and baby boomers, and maybe some millennials, they really struggle with not understanding what it is and how it works compared to regular dollar currency, for example, in the US.
Yeah. So a couple of ways to answer that question. The way that Bitcoin works is essentially it's a ledger, right, of additions and subtractions. So the same as if you have a bank account or a PayPal account, whatever it is, with a dollar balance, and you send, say you have 100 units, $100, and I send you $10, right? The ledger changes and it takes 10 away from my account. So now I have 90 and it adds 10 to your account. So the total number stays the same, but there's an addition and a subtraction. So all Bitcoin is at its core is just a ledger of additions and subtractions of who owns Bitcoin, right? And like which wallet controls which Bitcoin. And the way that Bitcoin is, not to add some complexity to this, but the way that Bitcoin is introduced is through mining, right? So the way that Bitcoin is mined, effectively Bitcoin is backed by energy. So the more energy, you run a program on your computer. At this point, it's super specialized machines that do this. I mean, you could run it on your laptop, but it's hard to compete with these super specialized machines. So you run a program, and the program is pretty energy intensive. It does some calculations. Basically, I mean, this is an oversimplification, but it's guessing a number, and the first person to guess the number correctly, to solve this equation correctly, gets rewarded. And that also secures the network because you're relaying the transaction. So that $10 or 10 Satoshis, 10 Bitcoin that I'm sending from one account to the next, they'll process that. As part of that, they get to process that if they solve the problem first. And if they solve the problem first, then they get an amount of Bitcoin. At this point, every block, which is 10 minutes on average, you get about 3 Bitcoin. And it used to be 6, and then it was 12 and 25 and 50. It actually gets cut in half every 4 years. But that is how new Bitcoin is introduced into the system, which is also to draw a contrast with how new dollars are introduced into the system. Like how new dollars are introduced into the system is pretty opaque. I think very few people could tell you how new dollars are introduced into the system. And no one, literally no one, can tell you when new dollars will be introduced into the system. With Bitcoin, every 10 minutes, there's 3 Bitcoin added, right? So you know how many Bitcoin are added per day, per week, per month, per year. You know how many Bitcoin there will be in circulation 10 years from now, 100 years from now. You have no idea how many dollars there will be in 10 years or 100 years. So it's actually a much more logical and predictable system. And the reason why that is, and I'll use a quote to compare the two systems. And when I say dollars, I'm really just talking about like all government currency. It could be euros, it could be anything. Bitcoin is rules, not rulers, and the dollar is rulers, not rules.